Transgenderism or gender dysphoria, these are definitely some hot button topics for a lot of people. I feel like it's come into focus more the past year because of J.K. Rowling standing up for her beliefs and splitting the feminist community in half. Today we have a video where parents claim their two young children are transgender. Perhaps they're trying to win the Nobel Prize for the most woke parents. I guess we'll find out.
The reaction when people hear that we have two trans kids is pretty shock and awe.
I'm not surprised that's the case. I've noticed this tends to happen far more with families in California, where you're surrounded by that culture that you have to stand out and find all new ways to be stunning and brave.
Before I had transitioned, I had like a piece missing to me and it just didn't feel right.
Before you transitioned? So what I'm taking away from that is this kid, who can't be much older than 11, is already on medication to transition. I don't see how this is legal. A child that's too young to even own a Facebook account surely cannot be old enough to choose to take life-changing medication.
Anyone can be whoever they want, and it doesn't matter what your opinion is.
That sounds pretty rehearsed to me, but even so, you can't just be whoever you want. I wouldn't mind being Chris Hemsworth, but it's not going to happen just because you believe it hard enough. That's not the way the world works.
Being trans, to describe it, it would mean you were born the gender that you don't feel like in your heart.
You can remember back to your own childhood, before the internet was in everybody's pocket. At that age, you didn't really have a concept of gender. So when you see kids this young talking about this, you know they're repeating what others have told them, be it from their parents or strangers on the internet. Kids will always try and go the extra mile to fit in. It's why peer pressure in schools is such a big problem. Kids are extremely impressionable.
Being trans isn't like weird, and it just means that you are biologically the opposite gender, a different gender than you are.
I would be interested to go through this kid's internet history and find out exactly what they've been reading, because this is not a normal way for a child to behave, to be extremely preoccupied with their biological sex. That's not something that should really come into a kid's head until they hit puberty.
When James was 8 years old, he asked to transition, which meant social transition, which is not permanent.
Come on, if an 8-year-old comes up to you and asks to transition genders, the first thing you do is take them off the internet for a while, because that is a very deep Tumblr rabbit hole that they'd lost down. But you also don't give kids everything they want. When I was a child, I wanted to be a tree. I loved trees, I thought they were awesome, but if my parents had used the awesome and unlimited potential of science to make me into a tree, I doubt I'd be thrilled about it today.
He got to use he as and him for pronouns.
Again, with pronouns, there are things you can tell quite clearly. An 8-year-old isn't just going to come up with all the same ideas and buzzwords as the hive mind of social justice. Buzzwords to me are a huge red flag saying brainwashed.
He then, this past year, changed his name legally and his gender markers legally.
No, let's not mince our words here. The child didn't change their information legally. You changed the information legally. I doubt your prepubescent child has the resources, funds, or knowledge to get through that process themselves.
I always have been a boy, but I started to realize it in first grade when I told my mom I wanted to have my hair short and that I wanted to look less girly.
So, being a boy as far as you're concerned means having short hair and not looking girly. There's a bit more to it than that. Call me old-fashioned, but when I was in school, we used to call that being a tomboy. Girls who like guy stuff, but are still, nonetheless, girls.
So James approached us in a casual way by dropping hints from the time he was 7 until he was 8. He would say things like, I'm half boy, half girl, half gorilla.
Yeah, honestly, I think you read too much into a 7-year-old babbling nonsense. Kids talk a lot of shit, it's what kids do. I mean, are you planning to help your child achieve the gorilla part of that? Somehow I think not.
I remember a time that he said to me, sometimes I feel like I'm a boy. And at that point, I was, trying to be a supportive parent and said, yeah, I've got effeminate feelings and I get that. And that's okay to have feelings that are masculine and feelings that are feminine.
Well, yeah, a healthy human expresses what they feel they need to, but you don't have to go through the long, painful process of transitioning genders just because of the boyish feelings you have sometimes.
I'm done.
Okay.
But the truth of the matter is I was missing these clues, these breadcrumbs that were being dropped around him kind of testing the water.
You're reading too much into it, mate. I think your initial reaction of being supportive of your kid's feelings was on the money the first time around. I mean, let's be honest, your 7-year-old isn't dropping breadcrumbs and testing the waters for his future plans. He's not a Bond villain. He's just a kid that talks shit like all young kids.
When I told them and they said that they accepted me, I was like super happy because I know a lot of trans kids don't have that, and that's sad.
How do you know that exactly? Being spoon-fed information from online groups you've gotten in way too deep with, I'm guessing. In reality, I think the children who have sensible parents that won't heavily medicate their children because of some feelings they think they have will end up being the lucky ones down the road.
He just now, a month ago, started hormone blockers. It's an implant. It is to prevent his puberty. It will prevent a menstruation cycle and breast development.
I just don't understand how people could do this to children. Not just the parents, but the medical professionals who installed the implant and prescribed these medications. I mean, maybe it's just what I'm seeing in this child, but the dark rings around the eyes, the subdued personality, this kid just seems unhappy and kind of ill. I mean, I don't know all the medications he's on, but you don't see that energy that someone that young usually has.
And he is counting down the days until he can start testosterone, which would be the first time something permanent would be happening, because at that point it would affect fertility.
Well, I hope you didn't want grandchildren. I would like to see a follow-up on this situation like 5 or 10 years later, just to see if the children are still happy with the choices they were inexplicably allowed to make.
If you use a blocker and go on to testosterone, your eggs would never mature.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to go through female puberty for that, which is something you could do.
I could, but I don't want to.
Why?
Because it's uncomfortable.
How would the kid know that? People put trans kids on some kind of intellectual pedestal of knowing exactly what they want and how they feel, but they have absolutely no real experience with gender, which only really properly kicks off at puberty. I think the kids just read a few Tumblr horror stories where people talk about period pain and that it's uncomfortable and it's just parroting it back.
I'm a guy, and it's like if any other guy thought about being a woman, that's uncomfortable.
And how would you know? Your long talks with your fellow man over a pint? Or is this just conjecture? I'm sure there are plenty of guys out there who wouldn't mind swapping gender just for a day and get up to some weird kinky stuff. Not that we'll admit to it. I mean I don't. I wouldn't. That's not. I mean other guys, not me. Never.
Do people ever wonder if you're too young to know if you're trans?
Yeah, and like, are they too young to know that they're cis?
Again with the buzzwords. You know this child has been drinking some very specific Kool-Aid. And as for the age issue, if they haven't been reading the same SJW dogma aimed at sexually confusing children, then it won't be an issue for them. And if you meant adults who ask, then no, they're not too young. There are people too young to decide this kind of thing for themselves, like you. It's why you can't vote, for example, because you're still learning and can't make an informed decision. I'll stop the video here because we're not even halfway through it and it's already beginning to drag on. But this really is a problem that needs to be talked about and addressed more, because I see it as child abuse and I'm sure I'm not the only one. People are in the comments of the video saying it's great that these kids have supportive parents who accept them, and while I agree it's important to have support with your life, your choices and things that are beyond your control, children also need to be told no. Children really depend on the experience and level-headedness of parents to make decisions that keep them safe and healthy. You limit the amount of unhealthy treats they can have, stop them from watching films that are inappropriate for them, and you wouldn't let them crawl into an animal's cage at the zoo. There seems to be this culture of letting the inmates run the asylum, be it with college students having way too much power over universities, rioters being given special treatment to think that they're in the right, man-haters making policy under the guise of feminism, or letting children decide that they want to take powerful, life-changing medication because it's their current whim. I really believe in a few years, when these children have grown up with serious psychological problems, and perhaps even, God forbid, end up taking their own lives, then we'll see a change in this new trend. But unfortunately for now, these kids will be the example for the future, and who only knows how many others will too. The worst thing you can do with somebody that has a mental disorder is enable and reinforce it, giving addicts their next fix, or self-harmers a knife, but with gender dysphoria, it's not only encouraged, it's celebrated. With that kind of culture surrounding you, I imagine it's very easy to be swept along for the process. But I've seen plenty of documentaries about people who have transitioned and then immediately regretted it. I'll leave links to a few of these down below in the description for you to check out. So, lovely viewers, what would you currently be, right now, if science had let a 7-year-old you decide? I'd personally be a tree, because, well, you heard the video. I'll put the answers that make me laugh the most at the end of my next video, and as always, thank you for your time. The previous question about who would BLM erect a statue to, I have to admit I'm kind of disappointed in you guys. I really, truly expected one of you to say Colonel Sanders. The path not taken. Anyway, I'll see you guys in the next video. Take care.